Welcome to Prospect Hill Cemetery. As he said, my name is Isaac Willard, and I started this cemetery when I donated these 32 acres of land. Now, part of my vision for this cemetery was to create a cemetery worthy of the citizens of Paw Paw. And part of my work here, I spent the last 20 years of my life beautifying these grounds. Now, I built a 127-foot tall tower on the highest hill of Prospect Hill Cemetery. You could see my tower for miles, and at the top of my tower, on a clear day, you could see straight to Lake Michigan. I equipped my tower with the best telescope I could find. My faithful dog Kato and I spent hours stargazing from my tower. Unfortunately, I wasn't known for my carpentry skills, and when a strong wind came through, my tower started to lean like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I was not too happy when people started calling it Willard's Folly, but it was still standing and still leaning when I was buried here in Prospect Hill Cemetery in 1879. Unfortunately, about 20 years later, a tornado came through the area and my tower came crashing down. Now, I could go on all day about my many achievements, but I see that your tour guide is ready to get started, so I will bid you farewell, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your tour.
Welcome to the Prospect Hill Cemetery Tour. I am Thomas Augustus Granger. I was born in 1808 and I came to Paw Paw in 1854 at the age of 46. As you heard from my esteemed friend and colleague Isaac Willard, he donated the 32 acres of ground for this cemetery. And when he did that, the Prospect Hill Cemetery Association was formed and I was its treasurer. And as such, I'm buried way up high in the cemetery, but not as high as Isaac Willard. And since he donated the property, it's only fitting that he have the highest grave. Well, let me back up a little bit. Like I said, I came here in 1854. I was part of, just like most of these people in this cemetery, we were part of the Great Western Migration of New Englanders that headed west. I began my life in New York. My father was a farmer and a blacksmith, and so at a very early age, I assisted my father at the forge. At age 16, I became completely in charge of the family farm. But at age 18, I was looking for a little bit more excitement. So I joined the 76th New York Militia. Now, this was some 50 years after the Revolutionary War, and the Civil War was still quite a ways off into the future. But I did see active service. At that time, around 1837, there was a Patriot War that broke out. And it was in Canada, and it was a war of ideas. At that point, there were two provinces, Upper Canada Province and the Lower Canada Province. Well, in the Upper Canadian province, there was a person by the name of Louis Joseph Papineau, and he wanted to press for independence for Canada from the British Empire. And so he was against the governor and his appointed guidance council, or not counselors, but guidance people, advisors. In the South, there was a newspaper publisher by the name of William Lyon Mackenzie, and he was going to take a very aggressive approach, and he and his followers attacked Toronto, but they were soundly defeated. And so they had to flee into the United States. Now, you might ask yourself, why were the Canadians trying to gain independence from the British Empire, and why would Americans help them? Well, when they went into Vermont, they found sympathizers. And so there were meetings that were held in Albany, Burlington, Cleveland, and even Detroit. And all in all, 500 Americans joined their cause to fight for Canadian freedom. Well, at this point, Martin Van Buren, who was the president at that time, did not want to get involved in another war with Great Britain. Maybe the third time would have been the charm for them. So he was staying neutral, and he put into effect the Neutrality Act, which was established in 1793 by George Washington, which said that if any American citizen, when we are neutral and they help another country during their time of war, would be subject to imprisonment, or they would be prosecuted. So by that time, I was the colonel of the 76, and I was ordered by President Van Buren to get 5 companies and march to French Creek, New York, which is now known as Alexandria. It took us 21 days to get there, and we had orders to capture any American coming back into the United States. Well, the British had another plan. They wanted to pursue the rebels into the United States, but there was a line of red flags put in the middle of the frozen St. Lawrence Seaway, and orders were given to shoot any British soldier who crossed that line. The entire war only lasted 10 months, 3 weeks, and 5 days. The rebels that were captured got 18 months in prison. This was the largest deployment of U.S. troops against its own citizens since the Whiskey Rebellion of 1793. Well, after that was over with, I stayed in for another 6 years in the military. I was appointed a brigadier general by Governor Seward of New York, and I retired shortly thereafter. As I said, I came to Paw Paw in 1854. My wife Julia and I at that time had been married for 22 years. We had 5 children. They were all daughters, and 4 of them came with us to Paw Paw. Clorinda was 19, Parnell was 15, Araminta was 13, and there should have been another one, Julia, who would have been 12, but sadly she passed away at the age of 7 weeks. We had another daughter 4 years later. We also named her Julia, both after their devoted mother. And she was 8 years old when we moved to Paw Paw. Well, I set up a grocery business, and that was very successful. Clorinda had married Andrew Jackson Satori, and we went into business together in groceries. And her sister, Araminta, married Daniel Spicer. Now, I'm proud to say that they had a child known as Harold Daniel Spicer, and he is going to be important to Paw Paw in the future, and you will hear about him in the future. I understand that's referred to as an Easter egg in your time, but I don't understand what that term means at all. So, getting back to myself, The first store I had was Munger and Granger. I operated that grocery store for 3 years. But then I decided that leather is important to a frontier town. And so I opened up a leather goods store with my son-in-law, Satori, and we worked with a tannery in Breedsville for all the pelts, the leather, etc. that we needed to make the boots, the shoes, the harnesses, etc. Our store was located in the 200 block of the main street in Paw Paw. North side, just east of the present-day Dykeman House. Well, in 1868, a fire broke out and spread through that entire block. I lost all my goods and supplies, the store, everything. It was a total loss. And I did not have any insurance. I did rebuild, but I no longer took place in the day-to-day operations of the business due to my age. And so I got involved in politics. Early on, I was a part of the Whig Party. But then later on, I joined the Republican Party in support of our great President Abraham Lincoln. But in 1873, the Prohibition Party was established. And I thought that the Prohibition Party stood for all the things that were good for a growing country to continue to succeed. Well, you may think that the Prohibition Party was all about alcohol. That was one of the main problems, but it was also about alcohol-induced problems and saloon-based corruption. You see, at that point, people drank a tremendous amount of alcohol. The day started off with an eye-opener, and then there was an alcohol breakfast, and an alcohol lunch, and an alcohol dinner, and then it ended up with a nightcap. Well, women also did not have many rights at that point. They were dependent on their husband for their sustenance and support. And in times of economic hardships, they were known to beat their wives and abandon their children. And at that point, not only was it about alcohol, it was about those rights. But those problems were caused by alcohol. And at that time, the average person drank 7 gallons of alcohol a year. That is more than 3 times in your time. Okay? Well, you may think, boy, this guy sounds like a politician. And you're right. I so firmly believed in the Prohibition Party that I ran for lieutenant governor in the state of Michigan. You may not heard of that because, well, I lost. So, after that, I settled down a little bit more, and my wife, can sadly say, passed away in 1879 after many, many years of marriage. In 1881, I married Maria, difficult name, Barbara Whitmore. She was a widow. She had 4 grown children. And we lived the rest of our days out in the comfort of our friends and family and the comforts of our home as well. I passed away in 1901. So I hope that you have enjoyed this very informative information. Not long, I don't consider myself long-winded at all. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your tour and have a good day.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, friends, and welcome. My name is Isaac Warren Van Fossen. I was born in 1826, one of 11 children. My father's name was Isaac Hannah Van Fossen, and yes, it did get very confusing sometimes. Now, my father and his brother John owned several mills in upstate New York. But because of a bank failure in 1829, they lost everything. They lost everything. So my father and another brother, William, decided that they were going to come west to try to regain some of the family fortune. Well, so in 1832, they purchased a piece of property in what is now Jackson County, Michigan. Well, William headed this way right away, immediately. And when he got here, he established a small village that he named Van Fossenville. You now call it Concordia. But Father remained behind to get the family ready to move west. And he built large pine boxes that fit nicely in the backs of wagons. And we filled those boxes with everything. We put in all the kitchen utensils and household goods and books and clothes, and just everything went into those boxes. And we traveled via the Erie Canal to Buffalo. And when we got there, we loaded all that stuff onto a steamship that was headed to Detroit. And when we got to Detroit, I was 7 years old, and there were the river was just swarming with Indian canoes, and they were there to get their government payments. And as a lad my age, that was quite something to see. Well, Father arranged to have those boxes put in the back of other wagons that were pulled down the territorial trail pulled by oxen through Ypsilanti and through Ann Arbor and Jackson. And about 20 miles west of Jackson was Fossenville. And that's where I was raised. And that's where I attended the Jackson Academy. When I graduated, I was apprenticed to the Jackson Democrat. And that's how I started my long career as a newspaperman. I later worked for the Jackson Patriot and then the Lansing State Journal. But 1854, several Paw Paw businessmen purchased the Paw Paw Free Press from forget his name, but they purchased it, and being businessmen and not newspapermen, they began looking for someone to publish the paper for them. So they sent John Baker, the district attorney from Paw Paw, from Van Buren County, to Detroit to interview me. And then I came to Paw Paw to see if it was a place that I'd like to live and publish a paper. Well, by the end of 1854, I had purchased the Free Press, renamed it to the Van Buren County Press to give it just a wider appeal, and I had become owner, editor, and publisher of the paper. Now, in those days, newspapers were sponsored by political parties, and the Van Buren County Press was operated as the news agent for the Democratic Party, and it was the only paper in the area for several years until the Republican Party sent a man all the way from Kalamazoo to publish the True Northerner. Now, in June of 1858, I married the lovely Irene Simmons. Irene and I had 3 daughters. Zell, our youngest, unfortunately died in infancy. But Rena Ray and Vern flourished. I really hope you get to meet them. The Simmons family was quite influential in the area, in the community at the time. In fact, Squire Jeremiah Simmons was the first probate judge in Van Buren County, and he also owned the Clifton House and operated. It was a hotel, and it's where Irene was born. And in fact, Irene was the first pioneer daughter born in Van Buren County. She's very proud of that fact. Irene's brother, Orville, and his wife, Margaret Gremps Simmons, both died. So Irene and I adopted their young children, Clayton and Ida Mae, and raised them as our own. Oh, also in 1858, the building that housed the newspaper burned down. But I was able to salvage enough stuff from the paper to get it back up and running and published again within a few months. But then in 1875, I will admit that I got kind of an itch to see more of our great nation. So I sold the paper and I packed up the family and we moved to Pensacola, Florida, where I published the Pensacola Advance. But within a few years, we realized how much we missed our family and friends from Michigan. So I packed up the family again and we moved back to Paw Paw in 1880, where I published the Paw Paw Herald, which was sponsored by the Greenback Party, and that was in 1880. In 1882, I decided to run for office myself. So I ran for state senate on the Greenback Party ticket. I lost, but I didn't lose by much. Now, unlike other third parties, the Greenback Party was actually pretty influential, had quite an impact for about 15 years on the political scene. They had 3 candidates on national elections, and there were 21 members of Congress from the Greenback Party. In fact, in the 1880 election, a lawyer from Iowa named James B. Weaver was the Greenback Party candidate for president. He got 17% of the vote right here in Van Buren County. Obviously, he didn't win. But a Republican from Ohio by the name of James A. Garfield won and became the 20th president of the United States and was assassinated 7 months later. Now you might be wondering where the name Greenback came from. Well, Greenback was the vibrant green ink that was used on the back side of the paper currency that the Union government printed during the Civil War. Greenbacks weren't backed by gold, but they were government bonds. So basically, if you bought greenbacks, you were giving the government a loan. And because the supply didn't depend on how much gold the government had, they could just keep increasing the supply so that they could pay for the expenditures of the war. But when the war was over, the government was called upon to redeem those bonds and take them out of circulation, which they did. And the influx of cash greatly favored farmers. And Paw Paw was, well, and still is, a farming community. And so there was a great support for the Greenback Party in this area. In fact, the Chicago Tribune wrote, "The Greenback Party offered an opportunity to accomplish something for the country at large, not merely for the farmers, but all those who live by their industry, as distinguished from those who live by politics and speculation and class legislation." Now, the party also advocated industrial reform. They pushed for the eight-hour day. They were against the use of state and private police departments to suppress union strikes. And they very much supported giving women the right to vote. They were also, Greenbacks were sometimes referred to as the Greenback Labor Party, because organized labor had pretty much disappeared since the collapse of the National Labor Union in 1872. So people that you refer to as blue-collar workers largely voted Greenback because they saw independent political action as the only avenue out from under the suppression and the tyranny of the industrialists. Well, eventually prosperity returned, and the U.S. went back to the gold standard, and and the greenbacks were taken out of circulation. It was widely assumed wisdom that bankers should be deferred to in those days in regards to anything that has to do with money or cash, not a bunch of uneducated and rebellious farmers and workers. Well, by 1888, the Greenback Party had pretty much run out of steam. We got to so few delegates showed up to the national conventions that we just simply ceased to exist. So, and I got really tired of publishing papers. So I gave it up, and I started up some companies that were job printing companies. Anything from stock certificates to sale flyers to just various anything a growing economy needed printed. They came to me to be printed. It was a very lucrative. And then in 1902, I decided to retire. After 50 plus years of working at the age of 76, I just decided to live the rest of my life in retirement. And that was in 1902. In 1917, I died at the ripe old age of 91. I think my daughters are probably waiting for me. We're going to head up to the family plot. So thank you so much for spending this time with me today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your tour. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rena Ray Van Fossen. I was born here in Paw Paw in 1870, graduated in high school in 1894. At the time I graduated, my class was the second largest ever to attend the old red brick school. We had 13 students. At that time, everyone, all ages, all grades, attended the old red brick. There's a photograph taken in 1923 of all the students and teachers of Paw Paw in front of that building. You can see it at the local history museum in our library. The old red brick was torn down shortly after that photograph was taken to make room for the new high school. That new high school is celebrating their 100-year birthday, October 20th. It's now Freshwater Church, and they're having their 100-year birthday party. You take these, give them to the history-minded people in your group. Okay. I'm glad the community wanted to save the building. It was an important piece of Paw Paw history and has stories of its own to tell. When I graduated, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I knew I wanted the best education available to me to meet that ambition. I graduated from the University of Michigan in 1901 with a BA in education. In 1923, I earned my master's degree in education from the University of Michigan. During my teaching career, I taught at schools in Illinois, Pennsylvania, Minnesota, Texas, and finally came back to Adrian, Michigan. That's where the village council found me in 1926 and offered me the position of second librarian for the Paw Paw Library. I was thrilled to take on the challenge. In fact, I grew to love my job so much that I was librarian for 32 years until my death in 1958. I was coming home from the library one wintry evening when I fell on my stairs to my house. They said it was a heart attack. But I guess you could say I worked right up to the very end. When I was librarian, the Paw Paw Library was far different than it is today. For one thing, It was downtown in the building that is now the Carnegie Building. We used the first floor of the building and kept supplies and other necessary items in the basement, in the downstairs, and of course, the necessary rooms were down there. You've probably seen other small buildings like our Carnegie Building in small towns across the Midwest. That's because James Burton, Andrew Carnegie's personal secretary, was in charge of the Carnegie Library grants. Bertram learned soon on that local governments lacked the expertise to understand the economics of building a library. He also concluded that most architects put too much emphasis on design rather than function. Bertram's vision of an ideal Carnegie Library was a single story with a small vestibule leading up to a single large room. That single large room had a place for the librarian in the center of all the activity in the library, where she had a view of everything going on from her post. The exterior elements were left to the local library board and the architect in charge of the project. And that is why the Carnegie libraries, when you see them, all look familiar, very familiar, and also very unique. I knew every book in the library. Noise was not tolerated. Young Roman Plazak knew that my ruler and I meant business. I didn't have to tell him a second time that the library was a quiet place. Okay. I remember when the board bought a copy of Peyton Place over my objections. Now, I had to bow to their wishes, but I kept that book under my desk, and I decided who could borrow it. All the women in my family belonged to the Coterie Club. It was a place for improving culture and the social life in the community. We were founding members of that club. You may remember the Coterie Club mentioned by Clara Anderson and Florence Harvey last year, if you came. Women's clubs may have started out as a place to improve culture, but they soon emerged as forums to address problems brought on by industrialization, urbanization, and political corruption. Without their efforts, our American society today might not have kindergartens, juvenile courts, park conservation, funding for schools, universities, and of course, libraries. The Coterie Club of Paw Paw was active for more than 100 years, and in that time, 698 women of Paw Paw had been members. Well, I see my sister Vern coming down the path. We're on our way to meet Father, but it's been very nice taking time to talk with you today.
Hello there. So glad to see you out here in Prospect Hill on such a fine day. My name is Dr. Vern Van Fossen, and I was born in Paw Paw in 1872, and I graduated from Paw Paw High School in 1891. As you can imagine, independent women were encouraged in my family, and I decided to pursue a degree in dentistry, which was a rather unusual profession for women in those days. But before I begin to tell you about myself, and because some have said that librarians have no sense of humor, I'd like to mention a quote that appeared in the Courier Northerner after the 1895 Coterie Club annual meeting. On the topic of the world moves, my sister Rena was heard to say, "One might be excused from fancying that with the current fashion. A slight gust of wind might start the ladies on their travels through midair." As for me, I was inspired by a woman named Jenny Collick Hilton, the first woman to graduate from the University of Michigan's dental program in 1881. Jenny was passionate about defending a woman's rights to having a career and used her own dental degree as proof that women could handle the training and pursue work outside the home. I understand that the Syndicuse Museum of Dentistry at the University of Michigan has an exhibit all about the struggle women faced when they tried to enter an all-male profession. Fortunately, Dr. Jonathan Taft, who was the first dean at the University of Michigan School of Dentistry, argued in support of women against his male colleagues. Taft wrote, "Women can accomplish good work, and I have observed that they are always above the men in their class." Let me tell you a story about just how difficult it was for women entering the dental profession. In 1861, Lucy Hobbs Taylor, who would become the first female dentist in the United States, applied to the Ohio College of Dental Surgery and was denied admission. It just so happened that at that time, Dr. Jonathan Taft was the dean at the Ohio College of Dental Surgery in 1861. Yes, the same one who would be at the University of Michigan when I applied. He tutored Lucy privately and helped her secure an apprenticeship with Dr. Samuel Wardle, a recent graduate. Once Lucy had completed her apprenticeship, she again applied to the college and was again denied admission. Dr. Wardle advised Lucy to open her own practice, and after 4 years, she had earned so much respect from her colleagues that she was finally accepted by the Ohio College of Dental Surgery, starting as a senior in their program. After just 1 semester, she earned her doctorate degree in dental surgery. I graduated with a DDS from the University of Michigan School of Dentistry in 1902. Rena and I happened to be on campus at the same time, and our mother Irene would come to visit to make sure our clothes were ironed and we were well fed. Rena and I might have been more adventurous than most women of our time, but she felt someone had to keep an eye on us. After graduation, I returned to Paw Paw and opened a practice in the front parlor of my home. Children's teeth were my specialty. I continued keeping up on new developments in my field, and in 1919, I spent 3 weeks in Chicago with periodontal specialist Dr. Austin James studying the pyorrhea prophylaxis, better known as periodontal disease. It was a disease even more prevalent then than it is now. In 1922, at the age of 50, I became very ill with throat cancer. I sought treatment at the Mayo Brothers Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, but they were unable to treat my cancer. In the hopes that a milder climate would be better for me, my sister Rena and I moved to Palo Alto, California, but it was not to be. I died in Palo Alto on January 28, 1923, and Rena brought me back here to Paw Paw to be buried with many of our family here at Prospect Hill Cemetery. I see Rena waiting for me, and I'm glad to have been able to chat with you on such a fine day. Enjoy the rest of your walk.
I have good news and I have bad news for this group. The good news is that you have reached a plateau, a wonderful plateau, and the bad news is that eventually you're going to end up there. So you do have a little bit more climbing ahead of you. But good afternoon, gentlemen, ladies. My name is Elijah Durkee, and I'd like to welcome you to my home. And I do think it's probably one of the most lovely spots in this entire cemetery. I find it rather kind of humorous that you would all be interested in my humble life. But since you're here and you've made that trek up the hill, and since I'm here, I guess I can regale all of you with some stories of what life was like in this frontier community. Now, I understand that you have already spoken with General Thomas Granger and Isaac Willard, and we have two very fine, upstanding, albeit rather long-winded citizens of the community, and I'm sure they shared with you about their experiences in the Prospect Hill Association establishing this fine cemetery. Well, I am the third member of the Prospect Hill Association, and my job is clerk, and I was chosen to be the clerk because of my background in law. And as clerk, some of the duties I have are things like applications and maintaining cemetery records. And both of these are very crucial jobs simply because application-wise, I have young families coming to me looking to purchase ground for their final resting place. And I often have to remind them that you may be coming to me with 1 or 2 or 3 children, and you need to be thinking about the future in that you may end this journey with 8, 9, or 10 children. So you need to buy spots that are going to be able to accommodate everyone. Plus, in many cases, spouses love to be buried alongside. So that was one of my duties. And then as the records keeper, it's very important to maintain good records because you don't want to double sell a plot of land. Nothing is more embarrassing than going to lay someone in their final resting place only to discover that someone else is already resting in that final resting place. So the records keeping was very crucial. And being the clerk, it allowed me to pick out my final resting place, which I did, and it's this beautiful piece of ground right here. Now, what to tell you about me? I mean, I was born in 1818. I was born in a rather nondescript county in New York State called Orleans County on the shores of Lake Ontario. The county is about halfway between Rochester on the east and Buffalo on the west. Growing up, I had a fairly normal childhood. I always had an interest in law. I always had an interest in public speaking, and those two things kind of go together. So I decided to pursue a career in law, and I passed the New York bar in 1843 at the age of 25. And I often think, oh, to be 25 again. I mean, am I right? Boy. I specialized in what's known as chancery law. And for those of you who don't know what chancery law is, I actually have here a definition that I wrote down. Chancery translates to, hold on. There we go. Chancery translates to that which is naturally right. Chancery law is a branch of law that focuses on equity and fairness rather than the strict application of common law. Chancery law originated in England as a separate court system that developed alongside common law courts. Chancery courts can order equitable relief such as injunctions or specific performance rather than just monetary damages. So that is what I specialized in, and I decided the best place to specialize in this was the state capital of Albany. So I moved to Albany, and for 2 years I practiced there, and I practiced alongside a gentleman by the name of Benjamin F. Graves. And I don't see any immediate recognition of the name. The Honorable Benjamin F. Graves actually came to Michigan a little bit after me. He decided to settle in Battle Creek, just to the east of us here, and he became a circuit court judge. Now, at that time in Michigan's history, the circuit court judges were also on the Michigan Supreme Court, and it was quite an arduous position to be in. So he did this until he decided to resign his post when Michigan separated the circuit court from the Supreme Court. So in 1867, I believe, was the date that they separated. He resigned his position, ran for the Michigan Supreme Court, and became a Michigan Supreme Court justice, which he held till 1883. Now, why this is so significant is because he served alongside justices. It was Christiancy, Campbell, and Cooley. And the four of them became known as the Big Four. And they really did a lot to establish the law that we have today here in Michigan. So that's kind of the feather in my cap to be able to say that I served alongside of him in Albany for roughly 2 years, and we still keep up correspondence. So now, as for myself, I arrived in Paw Paw in 1845. I began practicing chancery law. I was the third attorney to arrive here, and let me tell you, there was plenty of law to go around. My first case was a case that I was the defense attorney. The two prosecuting attorneys, the prosecuting and assistant prosecuting, were the first two attorneys to arrive here in Paw Paw. And we had the trial in the home of the Justice of the Peace at the time, Jeremiah Simmons. And Jeremiah Simmons' home was located about 3 miles outside of the village. And it was an arduous trip to get there. The trip was down a trail that was really no wider than my horse. And of course, on that trip, we had to worry about wolves. I don't know if anyone here remembers when we had the wolf bounty, where you would get $16 a pelt for wolves if you brought them in. Today, we don't have that problem as much. But either way, the journey was to his cabin. It was a rather rustic affair. And if I can paint the picture here, I want you all to imagine one room with a large table around which is the justice of the peace, the defendant, myself, the two prosecuting attorney. Along one wall is the jury. Over in the corner is Mrs. Simmons, who had taken ill and was bedridden. So she observed the proceedings from her bed, and occasionally the justice of the peace would have to halt the trial to attend to her needs. The cabin was stifling. It was hot. It was lit by tallow candles and oil lamps. You had a cooking fire going in the fireplace and the pipe smoke that we were all partaking of. So it was a pall in there. The trial commences, and it went for about a half an hour when the jury requested a recess. Now, this is not unusual. You request the recess, we adjourn, they go out one side, we go out the other. You kind of step out into the fresh air to clear the cobwebs. We reconvened, and after a half an hour, the jury requested a second recess, which that was a little odd, but not unusual. After the third recess, I felt something was amiss, so I decided to follow the jury. I followed them down a trail to the Simmons barn, where I witnessed all of them partaking from a generous cask of whiskey that had been provided by the prosecuting attorneys. Now, at this point, I could have asked for a mistrial, but I decided to continue on because I wanted to establish myself as a formidable attorney within the community. So I moved forward, and I'm happy to say that despite having a well-seasoned jury, I was able to persevere and won the case. So I established myself as a very formidable attorney within the village. Now, from here, I was in private practice for about a year, and then I decided to explore other opportunities. And what I did is I ran for and became probate judge. And this was in 1848. I served 2 4-year terms, leaving my post in 1857. Now, it was during my time as probate judge that a couple of things happened. Well, the most important, which is what I'll focus on, is that I courted, and I ended up marrying the love of my life, Althine Kilburn. And Althine, we were married, oh, she will kill me if I cannot remember this. We were married May 31st. It was the last day of May, 1849. Yes, all right, I have that. Whew. And just never has there been a more fine woman than her to put up with me and my ramblings and so forth. After leaving the probate judgeship, I set up private practice. I set up on the corner of Main and Niles, where I hung out my shingle, and I continued that until 1866, when my health was starting to take a noticeable decline, so I decided to simply retire to my farm, which was located just to the south of us here down in Lawton. In fact, if you go down to Lawton, you'll see Durkee Street. Durkee Street was the lane that led back to my farm. It was a 140-acre estate. And that's where I spent the latter part of my life, was enjoying time on the farm. Now, I don't know what else I can share with you that would be of interest. I guess I did think about serving in the Civil War. That was a huge endeavor, and I wanted to support the Union, but level heads prevailed and talked me out of it because they advised me that at the age of, well, let's just say I was in my 40s at that time, I was too old to go traipsing around the country living the life of a soldier, and I'm glad level heads prevailed because I don't know how well I would have done. So I served the community here, helping with that endeavor. My wife and I, we did have children. We had 5 lovely children: Willis, Ella, Cora, Byron, and Hubert. Wonderful, wonderful children. Durkees were pretty prevalent in this area. I had a brother who was very much the entrepreneur and opened a stagecoach line that ran from Lawrence to Paw Paw. He also had a stagecoach stop on the Plank Road his stop was in Portage. The Plank Road, for those of you who are new here, was a wooden road that ran from basically Three Rivers all the way to Grand Rapids. And in fact, an amusing anecdote to that is when they built that road, they started in Three Rivers and built north, and they started in Kalamazoo and built south. That was the first wave of construction, and they were supposed to meet in the middle, and this side stopped and this side stopped, and they left about 6 miles unfinished because the side from Three Rivers said that the Kalamazoo side was supposed to complete it, and the Kalamazoo side said no, the Three Rivers side was supposed to complete it. So for the life of that road, that section remained unfinished. Shows you how stubborn heads prevail. His stop was in Portage, and he serviced what was known as the Good Intent stagecoach line. And never in my life have I witnessed a name that is more honest than that, the Good Intent line. Hey, we were supposed to get you to Grand Rapids and we didn't, but our intentions were good. So, you know, it's just a wonderful, wonderful form of advertising. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like my time is growing short, so I will just bid you the best of wills on your future travels and your future endeavors, and good luck on your climb here. It looks like we have maybe a conveyance waiting that might be able to assist you as you head up the hill. So, but thank you for visiting my lovely home. I appreciate it. So, yep. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Peter Grimps. Did you know there's a Grimps Street in Paw Paw? Well, of course you did. Do you know why there's a Grimps Street in Paw Paw? Well, let's see if we can figure it out. I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my family. I apologize. Having been in the grave for about 150 years, my memory is not quite what it used to be. I brought notes. I was born in 1801 in the town of Palatine, Montgomery County, in the state of New York. When I was 32 years old, I decided I needed to look for other opportunities, perhaps in the territory of Michigan. Thus it was in 1833, I made my way from Detroit westward to Schoolcraft with the help of a Native American guide. We used a trail frequented by Native Americans called the St. Joseph Trail. I needed a guide because this trail was actually a path about 12, 18 inches wide through the wilderness. Not exactly I-94. So, once I got to Schoolcraft, I met several interesting people. First and foremost, a man by the name of Lyman Daniels. Now, Mr. Daniels and I decided to head a bit further west, looking for a site for our mill. We came across a partially constructed site about 20 miles or so further on, run by a fellow called, what was his name? Pierce Barber. We convinced Mr. Barber to sell to us, and mission accomplished, we turned around and headed back to Schoolcraft, and I went back to Palatine to my family. Well, before I left, actually, I purchased the original land patents for 320 acres of land, which may come into use a little bit later in the story. In 1835, I brought my family, which at the time consisted of myself, my wife Christina, and our 6 children, out from New York to what would become the village of Paw Paw. In 1838, Mr. Daniels, your host here at Prospect Hill, Isaac Willard, and myself surveyed and platted the village. Original plan contained 52 blocks. Quite ambitious, I must say. We named the village Paw Paw because of the profusion of fruit that grew so abundantly down at the riverbank where our mill site was, the Paw Paw tree, obviously. And the name stuck. I think it's the best name around. Anyway, I'm a farmer. That's my occupation. But I knew that a new village, a new community would take more than just farms. There are many things that they would need to make this a good home for my family and other families that would come. The territorial trail, which was inching its way westward from Detroit, would come right through Paw Paw. And I knew that would afford many opportunities for our growing community. We needed many things to grow that community. First and foremost might have been a carpenter, a talented carpenter to build our homes and public buildings, schools and churches, etc. I found a man by the name of Williamson Mason in Schoolcraft to do this job for us, which he did quite excellently. I also met a fellow called Daniel O. Dodge. Now, Mr. Dodge, I offered a full block in the village of Paw Paw and promised to build him a board house on the site if he would move to Paw Paw and keep tavern for us. As it turned out, Dodge's Tavern was one of the most noted public houses in southwestern Michigan, or would become so anyway. A doctor, we needed a doctor. Fortunately, I had a friend, Enos L. Barrett, a doctor back in New York, who I persuaded to move to Paw Paw and become our physician. Let's see. Everything's out of order. Why is that? Oh, I don't know. We needed a mercantile store, a general store, some place for people to buy, well, everything. because we had nothing. The mercantile store, the general store, would carry pots and pans, lumber and tools, clothing, fabric, guns, ammunition, coffee, whiskey, and barrels of penny candy. You have to know your subjects, right? Now, I am a farmer, as I may have mentioned once or twice before, and I had no idea how to run a mercantile store. Fortunately, I had an excellent partner in Isaac Willard. Isaac had been running a mercantile store since he was 21 years of age. At the time, he had several business interests in Paw Paw, but was living and working in Kalamazoo at Willard Mercantile. Our store was called Willard and Grimps. Now, again, I know nothing about running a mercantile store, a general store, so I hired my nephew, Edward Schultz, to run the store as a clerk and to keep track of the day-to-day operations. We lived, my family and I, in the back of that store until Mr. Mason finished our home directly across the street, which would stand until 1974, when it was torn down to make way for the new township hall. I suppose that's progress. We also needed a blacksmith shop. Once Mr. Mason had completed the blacksmith shop, I offered that to a fellow named Craig Byes, who became our blacksmith. Now, I may have mentioned once or twice, my occupation is that of a farmer. I had no intention of accepting any sort of public office. However, in 1835, I was persuaded to become the first postmaster of Paw Paw, an office I would hold until 1842. Now, whether you want to know or not, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the post office way back in the 1800s, something you may not even know, but you might. The post office at that time was an incredibly important concern. It's what connected our citizens to each other and to their government. That while postmaster was a political appointment at that time, and you may well guess problems that may occur when a government agency is run almost exclusively by political appointment, as opposed to choosing people for merit. My present company accepted, of course, but it wasn't always that way. As a matter of fact, during the presidency of Andrew Jackson, there was debate in Congress about that very fact, who's appointing postmasters all over the country. Well, it wasn't until 1970 that the post office became an actual official government agency with its own board of directors. They would choose the postmaster from that point on. Much more efficient, I thought. But back to what my responsibilities were at the time. I was supposed to keep the post office open Monday through Saturday during regular business hours. If mail was delivered on a Sunday, I had to keep the office open for a full hour after the conclusion of religious services. I've got some bug spray if you need it. Yeah, sorry. There were no postal routes at all at the time until 1863, and then only in the larger cities. In our village, in similar villages, you would come to the post office to collect your mail. If the mail wasn't picked up in a timely manner, it was advertised in the local paper 4 times a year. Now, I'm rather sad to say that there are no Grimps living in Paw Paw currently. My wife Christina died in 1860, and she was the first person buried here at the Prospect Hill Cemetery, in case you didn't know that. My son, Peter H., married Caroline Durkee, and they had one daughter, Isabel. Everybody called her Belle. And when she was older, Belle married Dr. William Johnson, and they had one child, a daughter named Caroline. Caroline was the last Grimps to live here in Paw Paw. If you come back again, perhaps Caroline will be available to tell her story. You'll find it fascinating. She has much to tell, and you'll find that the village of Paw Paw was very important to Caroline. Let's see. All right, my children, yes. Margaret married Orville Simmons. They had 2 children, Clayton and Ida May. Unfortunately, both Margaret and Orville died when the children were very young. Fortunately, the Van Fossens adopted those children and raised them as their own. Now, Clayton never married, but Ida Mae married her high school sweetheart, a fellow by the name of Frank Hudson. Now, Frank and Ida Mae moved to Everett, Washington, where they had one daughter, Christine, 2 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren. I remarried in 1861 to the widow Maria Buchanan. Now, Maria had several children by a previous marriage, but we had none of our own. I think that's most of it. Oh, there is one interesting note. Did you know the postal codes in Paw Paw begin at the corner of Gremps and Michigan Avenue? Not Kalamazoo Street in Michigan, as you might assume, but the 100 block starts at Gremp Street, the 200 block begins at Kalamazoo Street. That is because, of course, the first post office was in the back of the store, Willard and Gremps. There you go. And I appreciate your coming out. I hope you've learned a little bit of something. And enjoy yourself. This is the last day of summer this year. It's a beautiful day. I hope the rest of your day is enjoyable.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.